parents of a form's house. And with some difficulty, they found a parking space way down the block and had to walk a long way back to the house. They found another couple, and they followed them on inside. They went in, somebody grabbed their coats, and then they pushed their way through all of these crowded rooms, trying to find a room that had a little bit of room in it. And finally they did, a room that seemed blessedly lacking in people. And they sort of composed themselves and took a deep breath, and then they looked around. And what did they see? Parents from the form? No. An open casket. They had gone to the wrong house. See, my heroes aren't all perfect. Now for some concluding personal reflections. I've had the joy of many, many conversations with Father Denis over the 52 years I have known him. On every single occasion, his fierce intellect and his true North-like instincts are always on call. Here are just two examples. I remember one time talking to him about the marvels of the internet and how wonderful it was going to be because of this universal connectivity that we would have through this technology. When I finished my oration about the greatness of the internet, he simply looked at me and said, "Jim, I am afraid that all of this technology of which you speak will only make us more alone." Every time I see a group of people sitting at a table at a restaurant and they're all on their smartphones not saying one word to one another, I am more and more convinced his prophecy of a decade ago is coming true. On another occasion, I went to see him only days after Pope Francis had been elected. As usual, I got a few cents worth in, and then I asked him, "So, Father Denis, what do you think of this new Pope?" And without hesitating, he said, "Jim, now we have a Pope who recognizes that the church will only always have one constituency." And I said, "Well, what would that be?" And he replied, "The poor." Each time I see pictures and video of Pope Francis attending the most impoverished and needy in the world, I reflect on this remarkable insight he had before. That you, Father Denis? I knew you had a lot of power. I mean, you brought monks to the Abbey, but how about that? Okay. But each time I see... I think they're telling me I'm taking too long. I'm going to wind this up in 30 seconds, I promise. Each time I see pictures and video of Pope Francis attending to the most impoverished and needy in the world, I reflect on this remarkable insight that Father Denis had before most of us knew anything about this Argentinian cardinal who'd only days before become Pope. I have called him Father Denis throughout this introduction because for me, he has been a second father. He was my form master for 9 years, and I am who I am today, good or bad, in large measure because of this relationship that I've had with him. As they said, he married Barbara and me. He baptized all 5 of our children. He said the funeral masses for both of my parents. And was there with me and others less than a year ago as he gave last rites to my longtime best friend, Peter Rose, as he lay dying. He has been a mentor, a counselor, a refuge in times of need, and a friend I love dearly. What St. Paul says in Corinthians 1, chapter 15, verses 10 and 11 applies so well to Father Denis's life. St. Paul says of himself, "What I am now, I am through the grace of God, and the grace which has been given to me has not been wasted. Indeed, I have worked harder than all of the others. Not I, but the grace of God which is with me. This is indeed a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad that God's grace has worked through Father Denis." Please enjoy the video.
I was born the 4th child of my parents in 1936 in a town is Székesfehérvár. It is an old city of Hungary. I thought that life was easy and good, and so it was for my parents and my siblings. But then Second World War has come to our threshold.
He grew up in a family that was upper middle class, so his mother's side of the family ran what we would call a large department store. They lost all of that in the war. They became refugees, struggling to live, struggling to eat, struggling to have a shelter, literally a shelter in which to live.
My parents learned to live their faith much more vividly in those bad years. And I learned to go to daily mass, if there was a chance for it, with my mother, and learned really the big truth about how to trust in God from my father.
He went to a Cistercian school for grades 5 and 6. After 6th grade, the Cistercians were banned from the schools in Českověvar and throughout the country. And so for the following 2 years, 7th and 8th grade, he went to a state school in Českověvar. Then following that, the family moved to Budapest. And when they moved to Budapest, they sent Father Denis to a Benedictine school in Pannonhalma, which was a very fine boarding school.
Eventually, although I wanted to study French at the university, I was allowed to enter law school after graduation.
Between 1950 and 56, he was an underground seminarian in a sense. Religious orders were banned, and his vocational education was led by Father Lawrence Sigmund, who conducted classes in his home.
Like an unexpected bomb, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. October the 23rd, 1956, the students marched on the streets. Very soon, the events have turned into violence.
Father Denis's involvement in the 1956 revolution got captured on a video that was used by Time Life documentary to tell the story of the 1956 revolution.
So I left Hungary on the 22nd of November, so almost a full month after the revolution broke out, crossed the border to Austria. There were parts of the border still open, where it was, as it turned out, relatively easy to walk across. I learned from others that it wasn't as easy, but I was lucky. I tried the right place.
They really escaped. This wasn't, and many of them, I mean, some of the older priests were tortured and whatnot. This wasn't a pleasant thing.
And so I arrived to Rome a week later, and all of a sudden I was in Rome as a Cistercian studying for the priesthood. For the first time in my life, I was doing what I wanted to do. I got a doctorate in theology in record time, really. And about the same time I arrived to Rome, the initiative of this monastery has taken off. And so, at the invitation of Abbot Anselm, who was the founding prior of this monastery, I came to America in 1962 and started teaching in 1965.
At the time when we first arrived at Cistercian in 1965, it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was before Texas Stadium existed. It was before State Highway 114 existed. It was before Las Colinas. It was before Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Nobody had any idea where Irving, Texas was.
I became a very dedicated teacher. Every day entering the classroom for me was a happy occasion.
Here's a guy who did all his scripture study, you know, and was ready to come over here and teach something in theology perhaps. And he gets here and his abbot at the time says, you will go study mathematics. And in 18 months, not speaking very good English, he goes and gets a master's in mathematics.
His passion for math, his ability to really inspire the kids to pursue math as an avenue towards God, towards truth, I think speaks volumes in a world in which faith and reason are diametrically opposed.
I always preach as if I was teaching math, and I always teach math as if I was preaching.
I think he shared with all of us that studies well done, academics well done, are a way for the human being to become fully himself.
It was Christmas 1968 that I was told that I was appointed to be headmaster for the following school year. I was 32 years old at the time. I remained in that position for 12 years.
Father Denis was key to the foundation of the school because he is a born leader. And when you have a school that's just getting started, it's imperative that you have an outstanding executive.
He brought a certain discipline to the whole administration of the school that didn't exist before. And he stepped into it when the school was in a rocky period of time. And there was question on the inside about whether it could last for long. And he knew what he was taking on. It was really about the survival of the school.
He had a vision for the school. He wanted a school that would be small in such a way that each boy would be able to develop to the best of his capacities, but he also wanted it a very academic school.
I fostered and developed, entrusting a group of boys to a priest at the beginning in the 5th grade and making that priest responsible for the group of boys all the way up to graduation. This system exists up to now, and the idea was we called them the four masters.
We now have literally hundreds of graduates who are giving back to the Dallas community, both in their business lives and in working with the Catholic Church.
There's no question in my mind, he's the reason that Cistercian School is where it is, and more importantly, the Cistercian Abbey is.
For 24 years, I was abbot of the monastery. And I had the duty of reorganizing many things in the abbey. But the identity of the monastery could not express itself to the public without the church.
Father Denis believed that if this chapel got built, that it would call to people. Without a doubt, 10 years later, young novices start trickling in. And many of those novices are ex-Cistercian students.
I have had the privilege to ordain 11 young men to the priesthood for the Cistercian monastery here in Dallas.
Today there's 27 monks in the Abbey. 13 of them came, during Father Denis's tenure as abbot.
The Hungarians say that the Abbey of Dallas has been able to make real the dream of the Abbey of Zierz, from which they came, of being monks and priests and teachers. And Father Denis's mother, to whom he was particularly close, must just be rejoicing in heaven to see her son make real this dream.
There is another side to Father Denis that most people don't know about. He's written 10 books, 8 in Hungarian, and many of those on the Bible.
He would write articles on the church fathers and the development of the church in the 2nd century, 3rd century. He would participate in an ecumenical seminar, and he still participates in that seminar.
It was the result of his biblical scholarship that the Vatican named him to the Pontifical Biblical Commission in September 2001.
The Pope actually would use this commission as a sounding board for Catholic Church teaching on the Bible. He was an advisor to John Paul II and to Pope Benedict.
Abbot Denis, to me, is a great example of what a priest should be in this world.
The kind of clarity he's had about his own life as a Cistercian monk and as a priest, and the self-sacrificing character of that life is just intensely meaningful to me.
One of the lessons that Father Denis taught me that remains with me to this day, and it's kind of a small thing, but at the same time very important, and that is that every single person needs encouragement. Whether they be young or old, whatever their state in life, everybody needs encouragement.
He is all about what's best for everybody else, not what's best for him. And that's fairly unique.
He has a knack to be able to sit down, speak with you for really just minutes, and have an incredible understanding of who you are and what motivates you. It's a true talent.
He's impacted so many countless individuals in helping them discern life choices that we're eternally grateful to him for.
He expected so much of us because he expected it of himself.
He's one who can just kind of love you without having to be responsible for disciplining at this point. And I think he's really relieved at that too. So he doesn't have to worry about the budget in the monastery or the cars or the water breaking down, but he's just able to, I think, enjoy the community that he's built over the years.
He gave of his enormous talents, abilities, and love for us, and should be remembered for that.
To have some institution like the Catholic Foundation, which has done so much for the diocese, done so much for the Catholic Church in our area, to see them call attention to not the most obvious, but one of the most important and perhaps one of the least known, I think is a tremendous witness to the importance of the monastic life, to the importance of the life of learning in the church, to the importance of the individuals who give themselves in that life and faithfully serve other people in so many ways.
I know I am who I am today because of the way he cared for us and pushed us and loved us and nurtured us in those formative years. I could never repay him.
At an opening mass of a school year, if I sit just in a corner, unknown to most and unrecognized even, I have a happiness that I cannot express. Such a small community as Cistercian, a family of monks, surrounded with a family of students, surrounded with families of families. This is the most solid human institution in the world.
Please welcome Father Denis.
Your Excellency Bishop Farrell, Vicky Latner, Matt Kramer, members of the Catholic Foundation Board, Bishop Deshotel, Right Reverend Abbot Peter, Reverend Fathers and Brothers of the Cistercian Abbey, teachers, alumni parents, and students of the prep school, colleagues and students of the University of Dallas, friends, old and new, aged in memory and young in heart. I knew that this celebration would overwhelm me, but it has overwhelmed me more than I had anticipated. In some way, it evokes in my memory an event 55 years ago when I held my first Mass